I'm innocent.
All right, folks, today we have attorney at law John Clarke. There's a youth don't judge them say attorney, but this is just an attorney.
Well, you don't know. Could be the super version.
And he's joining us to discuss a very important topic, the review of Privy Council rules and laws. And John will shed light on the case of a man who waited 10 years in prison for his appeal and share insights on preventing such cases of misjustice. I don't know if...
Injustice.
Yeah, I don't know if
miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, I don't know if that is the word in the future. Morning, welcome to Smile Jamaica.
Good morning, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, before we get to what the prison mailbox rule is, this gentleman convicted, appeal immediately, asked somebody in the prison or whoever to, and it got to the wrong court.
Yes.
And it took 10 years. First thing is, wouldn't he not, it says he never had a lawyer, but want to legal aid. If I do something and I go to court and I can't afford a lawyer or something, legal aid lawyer is appointed, if that's the right word, immediately. And
that's one of the problems that we identify in the system. So Ray Morgan in particular, when he was being tried, he asked for a legal aid lawyer. But according to him, the trial judge wouldn't wait for a legal aid lawyer to be appointed, but tried the matter right away. And he was convicted.
How do you try him without representation?
Well, ultimately, to be fair to the system, sometimes if it matters before the court for a long time, if you had a lawyer, and then the lawyer resigned for whatever reason or came off the case for whatever reason, in some cases, especially with prisoners who are before the court for a very long time, they may want to hold up the process by changing lawyers multiple times. We don't know what are the exact facts of his case, but that is one of the reasons why it's important that the record is available, because he's complaining that it was unfair for him to be tried without a lawyer. But apart from that...
Is that legal?
It can occur because you have the right to legal assistance. And at one stage he had a lawyer, according to him, but then he couldn't afford to pay the lawyer anymore. So the lawyer applied to be removed from the case. The lawyer was removed. And then we are where we are now, where he had the trial date. And then with the trial date, he had a trial, he was convicted. But the very day he was convicted, he applied to the court he appealed the case, one, and he also applied the same day went to prison for legal aid. It took him 10 years, and after 10 years, after his service sentence, he did not get legal aid.
What took him 10 years? To get the lawyer, or that took him 10 years?
It took him 10 years to go into the Court of Appeal.
Jeez.
And then by the time he went into the Court of Appeal...
You don't serve him time already? No, but here's my question, and I asked it already. So he sent the appeal, whoever took the appeal, and this is what I'm reading. Even before this, I knew the story, and it went to the wrong court.
Yes.
And it takes 10 years, Sir John, for somebody to realize, say, wrong court, they send it over the right one?
Well, the problem, and it is a unique problem that is faced by parish courts, different from anybody who's convicted in another court. So we have two different tier systems. If you're convicted in the parish court, your appeal should go to the parish court and then go to the Court of Appeal. If you're convicted in any other court, you can appeal straight away to the Court of Appeal. We're of the view that must change and that Parliament must legislate that.
Sir John, you don't answer my question.
He's getting...
Yes.
He's taking the long way around.
Yes, so we're of the view that must change, and ultimately to answer your question in relation to Mr. Morgan, what took place is just a comedy of errors. And some of these errors are caused by the very word of the legislation. So it requires change. Because if you know the law that really governs this era, it's from 1938. So if you're looking at that kind of system, it is outdated, and this time Parliament reformed that law.
So what is his recourse? One, and two, how do we audit to ensure that there are no more Ray Morgans in the system?
So for starters, we want the law to be changed. So we're asking Parliament to change the law in relation to how appeals are done in the parish court level. We don't think that there should be one rule for the parish court and another rule for the other court. There should be one rule right across the board. And if there's one rule right across the board, Mr. Morgan would not be in this problem. Because, to be fair to the prison authorities, they dealt with his appeal, how they deal with all other appeals, which they carry to the Court of Appeal. But they have a special rule that applies only to the parish court, where parish court appeals should be carried to the parish court, and that must change.
Sir John, no disrespect to you, answer. You still don't answer the question why it took 10 years for somebody to realize that it was not the right spot.
Well, we can't answer the question, I'll tell you why. Because in this particular case, Ray Morgan wrote to multiple authorities asking for his appeal to be heard. But there is a comedy of error, and in fact, the system, how the system stays currently, there is no systematic review in relation to all appeals, and that perhaps needs to be done to ensure that this 10-year wait does not take place.
By
It
the
should
way-
never have taken 10 years.
By the way, even if the appeal had gone through, it doesn't necessarily mean he wouldn't serve the 10 years still.
It doesn't. But,
Right.
but no, let's backpedal. If that appeal had gone through, it is quite possible that he would never have served 10 years. And I'll tell you why. Because ultimately there's a rule that when you're a prisoner, you get 12 years, you normally serve 2/3 of the sentence. So ultimately he would have only have served 2/3 of his original sentence. He was also complaining that he was in custody 2 years before the trial was heard. Under our law, they would credit you with that 2 years as well. So it is quite likely that you'd have spent at least a minimum of 3 years if everything was correct. 3 years less than he spent. But he's
3 years
arguing.
less.
But he's arguing as well that in the parish court, as in the lower court, judges are only allowed to give you 3 years, not 12 years. And if the Court of Appeal said he was correct, that means he would have spent 9 years extra than he should have spent.
So what is his recourse?
His recourse can only be, and that's where we are now.
Sue
He
the
applied to the
government.
Court of Appeal for the Court of Appeal to review the case because they are the wisest judges in the land. So they'll review the case and determine what is the law. After they have determined what the law is, then all his recourse would be to sue the government. But importantly, regardless of how much money he may get, it will never be able to give him back time.
No.
And time is more valuable
What
than
is the
money.
prison mailbox rule?
Now, the prison mailbox rule is a rule that exists in other countries that once you're a prisoner and you're in prison and you file your appeal, the determinative date of your appeal is the date that you give it to the prison authorities. For Ray Morgan, the very same day he went to prison, which is very unusual, he went to the appeals office and said, I want to file my appeal. So he did everything he could have done to file his appeal. And not only did he file his appeal on the very first day, he applied for legal aid on the very first day. But he waited for 10 years. And after waiting for 10 years, he's hearing that his appeal cannot be determined. And importantly for Ray Morgan, which everybody should know, he was unusual because he wrote to many authorities. He wrote to the Chief Justice, he wrote to the President of the Court of Appeal, he wrote to the Registrar complaining that why is my appeal not being heard. But in spite of that, and despite the Chief Justice and the President of the Court of Appeal trying their best, the legislation is what really tied their hands because the legislation said it must start at the parish court, and that must change.
So what does so I asked you what his recourse looks like?
So
what does accountability look like?
Well, that is a question that would best be answered by the court system. And what accountability may look like in this particular case is changing the rule, one, ensure that there's a proper rule in place in relation to how appeals are heard by prisoners, and also ensuring that for this particular case, there is somebody who presided over Mr. Morgan's system.
Yes.
And that particular person could perhaps assist the system by ensuring that wherever those transcripts are found and that justice is done in this particular case. Because justice in this case don't only mean justice to Mr. Ray Morgan, but it also may mean justice to the complainants who may very well deserve the matter to be ventilated and that just sentence arrived at by the Court of Appeal.
As far as you know, this is the first time anything like this happened?
No, it's not. And in fact, Stand Up for Jamaica and Jamaican for Justice have been doing a project, and there are at least 5 other cases that we're aware of where persons would be in similar positions. And in fact,
That you're aware of.
that we're aware of. And the key part is that we're aware of. Because in many cases, and what took place for Mr. Ray Morgan as well, he said that he was encouraged to abandon his appeal to go home. And if he had just signed a paper that say, I don't want to appeal, I want to go home, it is quite likely that he would have been out long time.
But he would have a criminal charge against him.
But he would have had the record and he wouldn't have had the issues determined. So it was because of his doggedness that he wants the matter determined. That is why he had to spend extra time. And Mr. Morgan is not alone in this respect, because I know of other inmates who would say, well, I want my appeal to be heard. I know I can sign a paper and go home, but I think an injustice was done, and I want the Court of Appeal to examine the case and to do what I...
By the way, Mr. Morgan is now a free man.
Well, Mr. Morgan is now... he was freed by the Court of Appeal judgment, in which the Court of Appeal determined after almost him spending 10 years in custody that he is... his appeal is no longer before the court, and as such, he was freed in those circumstances.
But he still has a criminal record.
He still has a criminal record, and for him, and it's important, as the Privy Council pointed out, it is important for what the President of the Court of Appeal identified to be a miscarriage of justice, a serious miscarriage of justice, to be examined by the system, and for us to ensure that it's corrected, so this does not occur.
Corrected don't mean expunged, no?
No, corrected means that the Court of Appeal may very well examine this case and say, well, you deserve 9 years, you deserve 3 years, But corrected means that it's determined by the court.
Gotcha.
By the way, this says Mr. Morgan has a relevant criminal record dating back some 33 years prior to 2011, consisting of 72 previous convictions for offenses such as fraud, larceny, and forgery. And the final sentence says in 2022, Mr. Morgan pleaded guilty to defrauding veteran reggae singer Marcia Griffiths of approximately $4.8 million.
Yes. And
But John is going to say
but
that has no bearing on.
But importantly, we must appreciate that hard cases make bad law. And in some case for Mr. Morgan, what is important is that Mr. Morgan may have been in conflict with the law for a very long time. But what occurred to him can occur to a Jamaican citizen who is very well innocent. And because we're going to create a system, what we have is a system of justice. And the system of justice must work. It must work for the innocent and must work for the guilty, because we'll never be able, in many cases, to tell the difference between the two.
All right. Thanks for coming, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
Go on, Mr. Morgan.
Wow.
Mr. Morgan. Sorry for Mr. Morgan.
Rough, man. Turn out loud, John Clarke. Coming up, analyzing your resume. That's after this.